Welcome guys, today we'll be making plate armor inside of Blender. We'll be modeling a breastplate, a greave, as well as probably some vambraces or shoulder armor. I'm not decided yet, but in any case I'm sure you will learn a lot. And yeah, let's get started. So what I would recommend is having a base mesh or some kind of character to make your armor so that it fits this character specifically, instead of making it on its own without any kind of guide or reference. That way you'll be sure that it will fit your character, the proportions will be correct, and yeah, it's just going to make it more realistic, easier, and all around better. So I'm using this base mesh from Blender Kit. You can download it, I think it's for free, but I am sure you can find some kind of base mesh like that from free on the internet. So I'll just invert my selection just to hide all the armature. You want it to be kind of in a rest position, or at least a symmetrical position, because that way when we model, for example, the breastplate, we can use the mirror modifier, or the greaves, we can use a mirror modifier once again. So let's get started with the greaves, because I think they're relatively simple and will allow us to kind of get into it more easily. So I'll press Shift A to add a plane. I'll rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees. I'll scale it down, and in object mode I will move it just around the middle of the leg here. Now for the modifiers we will need, of course, a mirror modifier, a subdivision surface modifier, and under the advanced settings I will change it to keep corners. That way you can see that it will still keep them sharp and we won't waste any kind of polygons just to tighten those corners. So I'll add a loop cut in the center, delete one half, and you'll see it's normal that the other half is still there because we have a mirror modifier. Now I'll place it over here, and it's important as well to have reference images. I have on my other monitor a pure ref file that you can find in the description, and it contains all my reference images. I'll also add a solidify modifier, set the thickness to 3mm or something relatively small, and make sure to apply the scale. Okay, perfect. So we're ready to start. So in edit mode, I will delete everything but one vertex. Make sure clipping is not turned on yet. And then in front view, I will move that vertex to kind of the extremity of the greave. And now I want to trace the top part, kind of the profile of the greave. And what I'm going to do actually is just go into edit mode on that base mesh and select only the leg, approximately, and then separate the rest. That way we'll see better what we'll be making. Okay. So now back into the greave. I extruded my vertex once. I'm extruding it twice, just to get curvature. Keep it simple, even though you have a complex shape maybe at the top. We'll get into those details a bit later on. Now I think I will need two vertices here, simply to give me a bit of a smoother curvature and a bit more of a playground to adjust. Now inside view, I'm going to look at the reference and extrude it once over here, and it seems to widen a little bit. It seems obviously to follow the leg, so maybe we should move this one up, down. Then I'm extruding it once again quite low. Oh yeah, I forgot to turn back on the clipping. So I'm selecting all of the vertices at the center, then moving them on the x-axis just so that they clip back into the mirror axis. Okay, so once that is done, I'm pressing Shift-N to recalculate the normals. This can be an issue that you may encounter, pretty easy fix. So here I'm going to move the bottom vertices on the x-axis just to kind of give it the shape that I want. It may depend on your greave model, but for me, on my reference images, they seem to kind of have a little curve here where they go wider there, narrow, and then they taper, they flare out at the base for the feet, obviously. So kind of like that. Let me just erase those annotations and we'll get back into the modeling. So here my flaring is a bit too intense. I just want to have it flare out a little bit. And now inside the view, does that make sense or should they be more straight? Yeah, they actually seem to kind of follow the shape of the body, which makes perfect sense. Now, I don't want to make it too tight because I'm not an historian, but I would guess that the knight would not wear the plate armor directly on his skin. He would always have some kind of fabric or padding underneath. So I want to leave a bit of wiggle room around that. So here, let's make a little flare at the front. So I'm going to select those vertices and make them, scale them on the x-axis. Shade it smooth, then what you'll need to do is add a weighted normals modifier. Depending on your Blender version, it's either under normal or edit. I'll add it here, that's great for me. And now the Greaves, at least on my reference, I'm not sure if it's like this on all of them, but they're kind of made of two parts. So a frontal plate and a back plate. So I'm only going to be making the front plate with this mesh. The back plate will be a different one. So here is just a question of tweaking the shape, making sure that it looks good. And yeah, I'll do that in the accelerated and I'll see you once I'm happy with the shape. Now for the backplate, what I'll be doing is going into edit mode of my Greave, and you basically have two choices. Either you can make it as part of a separate mesh, or you can make it as kind of a separate body inside of the same mesh. If you do that, simply select this edge, the extremity, duplicate it using Shift D, and then kind of model it the same way that you did for the front part. So I'll just do it real quick here. That was pretty ugly, but what I'm going to do is make it out of a different mesh. So in that case, same principle, except I'm going to be duplicating my front part of my Greave, and then I will delete everything but that part here. And now the inside part kind of sneaks in into kind of right behind the front part. So I'm moving it inward just a little bit, then moving it in like this on the y-axis. Now I'll select the two vertices at the top, and I'll only be extruding these two to start. Okay, so keep it simple, no more geometry than what is needed. Now you can see that it clips into the leg here, and I'll just move it outward. Of course it's not symmetrical, so maybe we can adjust it in the mirror modifier, but maybe if the leg was placed differently it would help. Let's see if I can just pause the character, understand how this rig works. Okay, now let's move our piece of armor so it's right in front of the leg. I think it's already better if it's straight like this, and actually might need to move it. Now be careful to not rotate it. If you do, I would suggest changing your transform orientation from global to local, and so that way you can play around it and keep your transforms relatively useful. So here I'll just go give it some thickness back. So here we'll do the same for the bottom part. And now you can see that because I changed it to local, my z-axis is now this one. Which is fine, you just need to be aware of it. And that's why I use the gizmo. It's more of a visual guide than to really use the arrows. So here, let's make sure that we still have a rounded part. And here I want kind of there's not a fold, but there is a crease over here, right where it bends into the other direction. And I want it to follow this direction. I don't want it to be perfectly straight. So that's why I'm going to kind of slide those two vertices down to get the curve that I want. Now let's go into side view again. Let's make some room for it, because otherwise his ankle is not going to be able to move very well. I'm sure that would be a big problem in combat. Let's keep it like this for now. And what I want to do now is extrude that vertex once, just so that way I can create a face, and you'll see why in a little bit. And now I'm going to select those two, and with the loop tool extension enabled, it's free, it's built in Blender, just go turn it on. I'll go loop tool and then loft. In this case, I will need to press reverse to kind of untangle them. Now, in this case, it wasn't that useful, I'll be honest. But what it does is that it will create kind of a tangent surface. So you get perfect surface quality, perfect curvature. Let's give it some space over here. Let's rotate it. Now I'm rotating it in edit mode, that way I don't change my local coordinates. And here I'm going to select all the middle part and make my pivot to active element. Select this vertex in priority and then SX and scale it on the x-axis just a little bit to make some room to be able to go give it a bit of space over here. And now if there is a little bit of clipping, I'm not a character animator or modeler, to be honest, but I would say it's okay, because then you can just place your armor a little bit differently. You can just move it around at the end when you're ready, so that it perfectly follows the leg. So for me, I'll keep it like this for now, even though it is annoying. I must concede, I must confess that it annoys me as well. Let me just fix it, because I'm really annoyed by it. Okay, so that's great. Now, I think I want to give it a bit of a curvature at the top. Maybe it will make it so that it's a bit more comfortable to wear, because when the knees bend, then you have less chance of this part going into the back of your knee. So I'll just give a little bit of a curve. Perfect. And now the back seem to go up and kind of follow the same shape over here. These, I'll extend them so they go behind the front plate. And now you can see that the solidify doesn't really look that good, and you can just press, or maybe not keep sharp actually. Let's just set it to only rim for now. We'll deal with it later on. And does this work well now? Not sure. Oh yeah, it does add the modifier now. Perfect. Can we move it up though? Yes, okay. So I'm going to shade everything auto smooth and just make my auto smooth modifier above the weighted normal modifier. And now let me move it down so that way we have a nice curve follows kind of the leg. So obviously this is a very basic shape, and you could have learned this from any other YouTuber, I'll be honest. But what I'm going to show you now is kind of how to add ornaments to it and really push it to the next level. So if you've watched a few videos on the channel already, you'll know that we need to add a shrink wrap modifier at this point. So under the form, shrink wrap. Now you want to move it right below the subdivision, but above your solidify and everything else. And what the shrink wrap does is it will basically project your vertices onto another mesh, and you'll understand a little bit better in a second. So I'm going to rename this Greaves front plate maybe, and this Greaves back plate. Okay, and now let's duplicate them. Press M on your keyboard to create a new collection and move them to that collection. And let's rename it base mesh. So now for this one, I'll set it to, actually let's go to 5 subdivision level for both of those. And you want to disable your solidify modifier. So now I put them in the other collection, I hid them in the viewport, and now I'm going to select my backplate, add a shrink wrap modifier, yeah, move it just below the subdivision, set your target to backplate 0, 1, move this above, and front plate 0, 1. And now you can see that if I try to move those, they're now being projected. The shrink wrap is working. Now we can set that to all, just to get back our rounded corners. And now we can start adding ornaments to it and all those kind of details. So first I want to inset it and delete the mirror section, move it back just to get a very crisp little edge around here. Okay, now the first thing I noticed about my Greaves on my reference images is kind of the bulge at the top, and what we can do to create it. Of course we could have made it into our base mesh, but what I would like to do now is to add a second shrink wrap modifier, create 2 vertex group. This one will be called just wrap, so everything should be assigned to it. And now this one will be called offset, and don't worry, I'll explain them a little bit later. But I assign just the top vertices that I want to kind of roll back and kind of have this little offset over here, set it to outside surface, and then set the offset to 3 millimeters and change the vertex group so that it's only the offset vertices. Okay, so that is good, but let's see another method that we could have created this effect. And now you can see that it's offsetted, but in edit mode it's still kind of at the same place. That's normal, we're kind of just projecting them outward by 3 millimeters. Now let's hide this modifier and let me show you another method to kind of create this rolled steel or rolled sheet metal effect. So I'm going to extrude them, and don't worry, now they're being warped weirdly because they're not onto the base mesh, so it doesn't know what to do with them. And I'm just going to extrude them a few times. Okay, so now, before we move on to more ornaments, I just want to refine a bit the shape of our base mesh and our final panel. I want to have a crease that goes down the middle. I think it will add a lot of a nice detail. So I'm going to go into edit mode of our base mesh and simply add the loop cut straight in the middle, very close to this one. And one trick you may want to try, is just to add some crease to it, just like that. And I also want to move it up a little, and then move this one on the x-axis, just so it kind of enhances that shape, and it's not just a crease, it kind of flows into it. Awesome. Yeah, this is perfect. Okay, we can now hide it back. And of course the shape didn't follow perfectly, so what I would suggest to do is just to move everything over here and give it some more geometry, just so we can replicate that shape a little better. And now whenever you have this, you just need to move it up a little bit. That's just because Blender doesn't know what to do with these. And what I like to do as well is just to go over here, duplicate my first shrink wrap modifier, and apply it once. Let me just give it a bit of creases as well, maybe it will help. Okay, so now I want to kind of create a second plate that will go cover the bottom. So I'll separate these after duplicating them, that way you can see that the grease is still intact underneath. And now we'll make everything kind of be offsetted by 3 millimeters. That way it's flush above the surface. And actually let's just give it 3.5 just to create a little gap. And what I'm going to do is let me merge those at the bottom. Select all of these and move them up on the y-axis. And let's turn off auto merge just because it was creating a little bit of a problem. Is it this one here that's creating issues? What I'm going to do is turn back on auto merge and reduce the vertices count, and we'll deal with that a bit later on. Might just be the solidifier that's kind of being annoying. And now, because we are shrink wrapped, we can kind of create the shape we want without caring too much about the topology, the curvature being damaged when we add loop cuts and stuff like that. So I'm just going to create the shape I want over here, assign the offset. Now the offset is not strong enough anymore, and let's make it to, for example, 6 millimeters. Add some more geometry over here. Cool, that's pretty sick, but maybe a little bit too much for me. And I don't like this look over here. And let me turn back on. Actually, no. It gives it a bit of an unrealistic look to the corner by making it a little bit too sharp. So here I'm adding a loop cut at the bottom, just so I can offset. And here we have vertices that are a bit too close together. So whenever that happens, just make sure to merge by distance and then merge at last if needed. Okay, let's see what the solidified thinks about that. And now he's still being annoying here. Not too sure why, to be honest. Let's try to see if moving these... okay, I see the issues. Perfect, okay. So it was just kind of merging. There were two vertices overlapping, and so the solidify was kind of not sure what to do in this scenario. Here I'm merging those two at the bottom. And so you can create these quite easily. Of course, you can keep playing with the offset. And now let's add some rivets. Okay, so to make a rivet, it's pretty easy. The method I use is adding a circle, setting your vertices count to something quite low like 6, then scale it down. Actually, let me turn that off. Scale it down in object mode, extrude it once, extrude it twice, and you can see that this is not an armor for video games. I really don't care about polygon count. And so let's make this a little bit flatter, set my pivot point to something at the base, set that. That looked quite good. Okay, that's great for me. Now we can, let's see, yeah, perfect. So in viewport it will look like this, render like this, because it's set to 2 over here. And now let's apply the scale to make sure it doesn't mess anything up later on. And now over here under the snapping menu, the little magnet, first turn it on, and then you will need to check face project, align rotation to target. Now do those two things and normally it should work fine, where if you place your rivet over the surface, it will snap. And make sure your origin is right here, kind of at the base of the rivet. If it's above, then kind of all the rivet will be placed underneath. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So just make sure it's perfectly at the base. And I'm even going to kind of back myself a little bit by extruding it downward so that the origin, sorry, auto smooth messed up. Origin is just above the base. That way I have this little part here that goes into the surface. If the surface is too curved for the rivet, then it will still be kind of, it will still be fine. You can see that partially under the surface. Awesome. Maybe this needs a little bit more geometry, just to curve that point. Okay, so now what we can do is first add a mirror modifier, set the object to the Greaves part. That's here. And now I'm going to use Alt-D to just place my rivets where I want them. Now, we could use kind of array, geonodes and stuff like that, but in this tutorial I'm just going to keep it simple and limit myself to just using kind of simple arrays. This one might... not simple arrays, sorry, simple duplicates. And Alt-D makes it so that if I edit one of them, all of them are edited. And it's only, not only more performant, it's just easier to use in some cases. Yeah, I forgot. Make sure you turn off snapping if you're modeling something else. Okay. So now let me just scale those rivets, set my pivot to individual origin, so all of them are scaled independently. And now I'll go back into time-lapse mode just to finish this Greaves and add a lot of detail and kind of push it to the limit, just so you can see what you can do and not limit yourself to simple things like this. Okay, so once you're happy with the amount of detail you have and really the shape of everything, we can move on to kind of creating the little leather latches, all the remaining details. Before that though, I want to add a lattice modifier and kind of reshape the greaves a little bit. I think the proportions are a bit off. If I look at my reference, mine seem a bit too bulky. So I'm going to add a big lattice all around that and just use it to kind of transform the greave we have here. And now you could do it kind of the manual way, but I prefer to use a lattice, one because it's non-destructive, and two because we can do it without changing the base mesh. And how you can do that is quite easy. I'll just select all the parts over here. I made them into a nice collection. So select all your parts, then shift click, select your lattice as the last item, then Control P, lattice deform. That's it. And normally the lattice should be added at the complete end. Yeah, just like that. So now we can add some divisions. Maybe not in that direction. And now I would not suggest going into modeling armor parts with the idea that you're going to need the lattice. But it's a really good way to edit something kind of as a last resort. It makes it really easy, but it also makes it more annoying to edit afterwards. Because now if I go into edit mode, you can see that it pops off. So I would suggest always use the lattice kind of at the end. And if you're just modeling your base mesh, then for greaves, don't even use a lattice. You should just model your base mesh kind of normally. But yeah, you can see how just the impact that it had. Let's say on this piece. Okay, maybe not on this piece, but on this one, you can see. Much more slim now. And maybe let's just move that back. So yeah, a lot slimmer, a lot more sleek. Now don't worry about the rivets, we can just use the same principle. I put them all in a collection. Let's see if it works. Yes, but I added a shrink wrap modifier to my rivets. I'm going to move it down over here. So I'm going to select all my rivets and then deselect the bottom ones. And then we can try with the lattice copy modifiers. Yeah, this one, we'll need to remove that. Okay, I'm gonna be honest, that didn't work as expected. Let's change, let's see if we can fix that. I think we may just need to kind of reproject them. Let's remove that, the lattice from the selection, deselect those, then copy modifier. Let's remove the lattice, copy modifier. Okay, and yeah, let's just select them, select everything except the lattice, and then just pop, move them once, and fix the ones that just didn't like the transform. Remove mirror from the center ones. Okay. And now for the bottom rivets. Same principle, except we'll deselect the top ones. Local view, remove the lattice, copy modifier, exit local view. Okay, you're good. Let's remove you. This, I assume you're like that. And now, actually, let's try to add some tiny rivets. These would be kind of decorative rivets, I imagine, because I made this design in kind of 2 sheet metals. If you wanted to go like super high model quality, I would merge those two together and just make a nice soft transition over here. And maybe we can even make it, actually. After that, I wonder why my tutorials end up being 1 hour long. But yeah, it's much nicer. I'm not the biggest fan of the lines anymore, but I'll keep them just for the sake of this video, to not waste more time. Okay, so now for the leather straps and kind of the buckles and everything that will kind of hold the 2 plates together. It's pretty simple. I'll just go in edit mode, select the face, duplicate it, separate it into a new mesh, and then over here change it to keep corners. And we'll need to make little hinges, and let me just look at the reference, see what they look like. Let's go in local mode, change that back to keep corners. I think it will be easier. And set. Make everything flat by scaling everything over here. Now I'm building a quick hinge, so putting my origin right here. That way I can add a mirror modifier, at least tweak our mirror modifier so that it fits better. Let's tweak that. Okay, so once you have something that looks like an hinge, might be better than mine, but we'll do with the time we have. We'll just need to place 2 of them. One, I assume, at the bottom, and one at the top. Now, I'm not gonna make sure that it opens, I just want it to look like it could open, that it has a way to kind of bend. Let's just rotate it. At this point, I don't really care if it doesn't look perfect. I just want to have this little detail whenever you look at it from the back or from the side. Okay, now this is good enough for me. So I duplicated a rivet. I'm going to add it over here. No need for the shrink wrap on this one. And let's not forget the other one. Yeah, I think one looked better, and it would make a bit more sense because we have only one on the other part of the hinge. And now it doesn't need, however, to be on both sides of the greaves, because on the other side we'll have the leather straps. Okay, cool. Now for the straps, it's actually a bit easier, I would say. I'm just going to select the hinge, select that face, separate it into a new mesh, and then let's start over on this side. Okay. So what I'm going to do is turn off the snapping, then going into side view, I'll just make a shape that looks kind of like a circle. And this will be the part that is riveted onto the greave. And then I'll extrude once. Try to keep the thickness consistent. And then extrude it a second time. Like so. And then let's just extrude it and make it curve outward. If you have a belt, I would suggest just looking at it and seeing how it looks, because it's really just the same principle, at least on my reference images. And the solidify, let's put the weight in normal and auto smooth afterwards. And then a bevel modifier above, set it to something real small, like 1. Don't forget to apply the scale, change the thickness to maybe 3 millimeters. That might be a bit much. And okay. If you're using cycles, by the way, for your rendering, you don't necessarily need to add a bevel modifier. You can just use a bevel node in the shader tab. That way you save a lot of geometry for pretty much the same look. Let's just give it a little bit of a round shape over here. Now there are 2 components to this strap. First one you'll see in a second. I'll just duplicate an edge into a new mesh, then F3, and then I'll search for convert to curve. And yeah, if you have a solidify modifier, that will do it. I'll dissolve those segments over here, scale that, and now we can extrude it. Basically to create a U shape. And now I'm using a curve just because now we can thicken it pretty easily, like this. Of course, that might be a bit big. Shade smooth. And let's select those 2, scale them down, move them up a little bit, and then I'm going to go back to a mesh, convert, you need the V here, and to a mesh, just so I can bevel these 2. Now, if you're not happy with the thickness, Alt S is a pretty good shortcut just to change the thickness of something like that. Let's give it just a brown color to make it look a bit like leather. And let's make you be the same metal. Okay, for the cuirass or the breastplate, let's start. Let's hope Blender doesn't crash, because it's been the 4th crash in a row while I've been making this. So instead of starting with a plane, I'll just duplicate one of the mesh. I'll remove the shrink wrap modifier. Don't worry if you don't have any for now. It's a later addition. I will also add a mirror modifier, and we don't need you. And scale it all the way above over here. And let me just put that here. And yeah, okay. And let's remove that. Okay, so I'm going to place that here and collapse everything. So basically, you don't need to do what I just did. Simply have a mesh with a single vertex in it. And then you need the mirror modifier, subdivision surface, solidify, and weighted normals. And smooth by angle, you can just get it by pressing shade auto smooth. Okay, now I'll save just to make sure Blender doesn't crash or anything. That's quite annoying. So I'll extrude it once, that single vertex. And we're going to be making kind of the color, if you will, of the breastplate. Let me just look at the reference, see how far they go. So they seem to go a bit further back than this. I guess it's the trapezoid. I'll just extrude those once. Seems to be quite straight, maybe a slight angle. Turn on clipping, move that back over here, add a loop. It seems to be a bit closer to the neck. This is why having a base mesh of a character is so important. It allows you to gauge the proportions a lot better with your reference images than simply having nothing to compare. I'll select these two vertices of the color, extrude them, and then SX0 just to make them flat. Let's select those 4 to make them flat using SX0. And I'm going to fill those together like this. And then you, I want to move you up, and you, it annoys me that it sticks out so much. This guy is a bit too buff for my liking. Would have made it easier to fit the armor if he was a bit leaner. Okay, so I'm extruding those two down here, and let's not worry too much about the edge flow, we'll fix it later on. Now what I want to do, however, is select only the 2 vertices kind of closest to the mirror's edge, and then I'll extrude them maybe once over here, and we'll kind of trace the silhouette of the breastplate. And now the apex seems to be right below the pec, like just below the sternum, I guess. I think it's sternum in English, like the solar plexus maybe. Anyway, you just want it to be below this line, and then we'll start to go back inward over here, and it seems to stop maybe just below the belly button. Let me just do that over here and move that out. Now I'll select those 2 edges at the bottom, extrude them once on the x-axis, and then another time just moving them to create kind of the roundness that we want. And I guess we could have started with a cylinder and cut it in half, but personally it's not my favorite method. I think it's a lot less flexible than just extruding single vertices or edges, which makes it a lot easier to edit back and forth. I'm going to dissolve this loop just to make a bit more room. And now I'm surprised that it doesn't really cover the shoulders, but I guess it's because it's another piece of armor that goes there. Okay, now we can maybe create a loop that will go all around the shoulders and the armpits. I think extruding this maybe, filling those in, moving that out, and it seems to flare out a little bit around here. And now to make this a quad, that will make sense, not just a quad to have a quad, but a quad that will kind of help with the edge flow. Actually, let's fix the proportions of this part beforehand. I want to have a curve over here so that the highest point is the center line. What does it look like if we fill that in? Let me delete this edge right here. Select everything, auto merge, turn this on. Okay, so we should have this kind of metal t-shirt that just covers the front. And it seems to be quite well adjusted at the waist. So maybe we can set our pivot to active element. You can change it here, but I'm just pressing the key 2 keys to the left of shift. Not sure what it's called, maybe colon, something like that. So we want it, let's just move it over here. When you see this yellow line, it's because I'm pressing G twice, then C, and it allows me to kind of extend it past its endpoint. Here I think I'm going too far in. Seems to protect very little of the shoulders. Mostly focus on the chest. Here I'm going to move a bit further from the neck, just so I can move it down a little bit and not be so much in the trapezoid. And the gorget will kind of fill in that area anyway, so it's not like it's going to be visible. I'll move it. I'll move you over here. Okay. Now maybe this we can play around a little. So at this point it's really just kind of shaping our breastplate. So I'm just going around, moving vertices and keeping the number that I have to the minimum. That way it makes it much easier to edit whenever I need something. Here I'm going to create the loop around the shoulders and the armpit. Let's just move that in. This loop is important because if you want to kind of follow the form very well, you need ideally edges that will follow this, like this. You can see that if I need some kind of geometry that follows around, I just add a loop and it will follow perfectly. Well, if it was a straight edge over here, maybe it would kind of create a weird bend in some areas. It's not mandatory, but I feel like it helps a lot. Now let me pull those back in again, because I think I made them a bit too wide. The next section will be in a time lapse, so I'm just going to be editing the mesh and the proportions. Once that is done, then I'll go back to a normal speed so we can follow back along, and feel free to just see what I'm doing and copy what I'm doing, or if you're happy with yours, just skip over to the next section. Okay, so I'm now happy with the shape of my cuirass. Next thing you want to do is go under the advanced settings of the subdivision surface and change all to keep corners. And what that will do is just keep those corners sharp. You can see instead of rounded. And this will help us a bit later. Now I'll go make the back of the cuirass. It's the same principle, so I'll just put that part into a time lapse as well. Okay, once you're happy with the shape of your cuirass, what I'm going to do is select all the parts that we have modeled for it, then press M on your keyboard and we'll create a new collection for it. I'll just call it Cuirass, like this. Perfect. And this will allow us to kind of, one, organize our file, but also kind of get all the parts of our Cuirass in one shot by just right-clicking on the collection and then select object. This may seem kind of not very useful when we have only 2 objects, but you'll see that when we have like 30 objects with all the rivets and details, it becomes pretty useful to just be able to select the objects you want from one part. So with that done, I'll select both of those parts, duplicate them, and then create another collection, base mesh, Cuirass. So selecting the frontal part in the base mesh collection, I'll crank the subdivision count to 5. You can go to 4 if your PC is really slow. Then I'll disable the solidify modifier, and I'll do the same for this one. And the reason you don't want to solidify is that sometimes it messes up with the kind of your final mesh will try to project itself onto the solidified edge, and that's not great. So I'll just hide them afterwards. And now, what you'll need to do is add a shrink wrap modifier, place it below subdivision, like we did for the Greaves, and you want to select the appropriate mesh in the base mesh collection for your shrink wrap target. This should be the rear, and this is the front, and this is front. Always important to rename your objects. Okay, so now for the next section, because it's very similar to what we did over here, I'll just be modeling it on my own and share the time lapse with you. But if you have any specific questions, just let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to explain in another video or just in the comments below or on Discord. Right. Now once you're happy with kind of the overall shape and the big details, we'll add smaller ones. So I'll take one of the rivets we made before, duplicate it using Shift D and not Alt D this time, and change the shrink wrap target to our breastplate and change the mirror object to be that same object. Let me make it the main breastplate over here, then turn on snapping, perfect, and we'll just place them where they need to go. So for me, this is enough modeled details. Of course, you can push it even further, but this should give us quite a good amount of detail to work with. And with the textures, which is the next step, you can really push it further and create a lot of intricate motif and details. So I'm going to unwrap it, then send it to Substance Painter. And this is what it looked like after Substance Painter. You can see the textures. You probably saw them in the animations that I sprinkled all over the video. But yeah, you can see how much details textures can add. I did it pretty quickly, like I could have spent a lot more time with the ornaments and kind of the edgeware, making it make more sense. But yeah, you can see kind of what the model looks like and how much detail you can add in the texturing. So if you want to see that in a future video, let me know, and I'll be happy to make a tutorial about that as well. And if you like this one, please share it, like it, comment. Always makes me happy to answer your questions down below or on Discord. The link is in the description. And for me, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.